Each day, without having to think twice, your heart beats about 100,000 times. Responsible for pumping poorly oxygenated blood to your lungs and freshly oxygenated blood to the rest of your vital organs, the heart has one of the toughest jobs of any organ in the body. If you've ever been interested in how the heart works and does what it does, this video is for you. Let's get into it. Hey everybody, it's Ricky. Today I want to talk about all things cardiac anatomy from the perspective of a cardiology pharmacist. My goal with this video is to give you enough detail to have an above average understanding of how the heart works, but to be simplified enough so that you can actually remember some key take-home points to share with others. Really, the whole point of this video and the whole purpose I made this channel was so that anyone of any educational background could come here and learn something new about their heart and be able to advocate for their own health and the health of others in their lives. And so if there's one video you watch, this is probably the most important, and I really implore you to stay until the very end. So in the spirit of simplicity, I broke this video down into 3 very easy to follow sections. First off, we're going to talk about the major blood vessels around the heart and the chambers of the heart. Secondly, we're going to discuss the valves of the heart. And finally, we're going to discuss the coronary arteries, or the direct blood flow surrounding the heart. Now, to help illustrate a lot of the topics and concepts that we'll be talking about today, I want to introduce a model heart that was generously given to me from one of my former co-residents during my second year cardiology residency. It opens up and we can see a lot of structures inside, and so we'll talk more about this later. To orient everyone, just as some really basic things from a cardiology naming perspective, let's get our rights and our lefts figured out. So imagine there is a straight line coming down the middle of my face, and I put up what is my right arm and what is my left arm, but to you, this is my left and this is my right. And so the question is, how do we do naming? From whose perspective does this matter most? A good rule of thumb, at least for heart, is to always think of the sides from the perspective of yourself or the patient. So for example, when I talk about the right side of my heart or the right side of the body, it will be my right side, although it'll look like it's the left to you, just so we're on the same page. So now getting back to our model here, you can see that the heart is generally a fist-sized organ. So this is more or less to scale. And very simply, all you need to know is that the heart sits behind your sternum, otherwise known as your breastbone, which is this hard bone right in the middle of your chest. It sits behind it and slightly to the left, just about like this. A fun fact is that some people are actually born with the heart on the right side of the sternum, and we call this dextrocardia. All right, everybody, I've set up our model heart so we can start talking about our first section, chambers and the great vessels. And the best way in my mind to conceptualize this is to start by talking about the chambers. Now, before we talk about the chambers, again, let's orient ourselves to our sides, left and right. So I like to imagine that this heart here is actually in somebody, and there is a person standing here looking at us. So remember, from their perspective, this side will be the right side, and this side here will be the left side. And as you can see, we have 1, 2, 3, 4 different chambers. You can see here that we have 2 chambers toward the top and then 2 chambers toward the bottom. And now, knowing how we're oriented, we can pretty easily say that these are the right-sided chambers and these are the left-sided chambers. The chambers that are up on top here that are a bit more circular are atrium. So we have our right atrium and we have our left atrium. The chambers below the atria that are on the bottom part of the heart and are a bit more, kind of triangular shaped almost, these are your ventricles. And again, we have our right ventricle and we have our left ventricle. The whole purpose of the heart is to move blood through the atrium and the ventricles either to the lungs or to the rest of the body. It's basically a bunch of plumbing that gets blood from one place to the other. The second thing you need to understand is what type of blood is going through each chamber. We have two different kinds of blood. This is deoxygenated or poorly oxygenated blood, and then freshly oxygenated or just oxygenated blood. Now, when blood goes to all of our organs, like the brain, the liver, the kidneys, so on, it uses up oxygen because we are, beings that need oxygen to survive. And so all that blood has to come back, and when it comes back to the heart, it's deoxygenated because those prior organs took out all the oxygen. Deoxygenated blood is, typically a darker, more bluish color. And so any vessel here where you see blue is indicating the movement of some type of deoxygenated blood. On the contrary, oxygenated blood that's coming back from the lungs, again, has fresh oxygen in it. That tends to make the blood look a bit more red. And so that's why on this diagram, you'll see this large red vessel here, indicating the movement of oxygenated blood. The whole goal of the heart is to get deoxygenated blood back to the lungs, to get reoxygenated, and then to get oxygenated blood out to the rest of the body to your vital organs. So now that we understand the four chambers of the heart and their names, and also, the general differences in oxygenated and deoxygenated blood, let's actually start with how blood moves throughout the heart in these chambers. And to illustrate that, we'll start by actually turning the heart to the side here. So imagine we're looking at someone from their right side. This would be the person's back, and then this is still that right side of the heart here. You see two large vessels here, one here and then one here. That's just kind of cut off at this segment here. And you can see they are blue, indicating deoxygenated blood. These are the superior, meaning above, and inferior, meaning below, vena cavas. If you find that difficult to remember, think of them basically as big collecting vessels. They collect deoxygenated blood from your upper extremities in the lower part of your body and bring it all back to your right atrium here to begin the process of reoxygenating that blood. So think of the right atrium as where this process begins, it being the collector. From the right atrium, we head into the right ventricle. And then from the right ventricle, we head into this deoxygenated vessel here called the pulmonary artery. Now, you may have learned in school that all arteries are supposed to carry oxygenated blood, and usually veins carry deoxygenated blood. And the technical reason for this difference is, in the scientific field, what we say is that arteries are typically bringing blood away from the heart, whereas veins are bringing blood toward the heart. So in this instance, although, this is carrying deoxygenated blood, the pulmonary artery is moving away from the heart, and that's why it's given that name. All you need to remember is that the pulmonary artery goes directly to your lungs, and in your lungs, oxygenation happens, the blood gets oxygenated, and it's ready to go. It's ready to get back to the heart and go to the rest of the body. But the question is, how do we do that? Remember, this is our right side. Now we're going to shift gears to our left side, where oxygenated blood is dealt with. And you can see 1, 2, 3, 4 of these little circles. These represent something called your pulmonary veins. And your pulmonary veins bring oxygenated blood back from your lungs and brings it all into the left atrium, this circle right here. From the left atrium, blood moves into the left ventricle, and then from the left ventricle into this large red vessel here, which is called your aorta. And from your aorta, blood goes basically to every other part of the body. Blood goes firstly actually back to the heart to make sure that the heart has blood supply. It then goes to the brain and the upper extremities, and then goes down to the lower part of your body and a lot of the organs in your abdomen. Now, when you hear about things like heart failure, oftentimes when we talk about heart failure, it's in reference to the left ventricle. This kind of is given the title of most important chamber in the body because it is what's responsible for getting blood to the rest of your body. So if this chamber is weak, you can have a lot of problems. And so things like heart failure and heart attacks are oftentimes causing issues with this chamber specifically. However, in other types of disease states, the other chambers, particularly the right ventricle, might be involved as well. Next, I want to talk about the valves of the heart. And to talk about this, I zoomed in a little so you can have a bit of a better look at what's going on. We just learned in the last section that we have 4 chambers: the right atrium, the right ventricle, the left atrium, and the left ventricle. And between each of these chambers, we have a valve. And so starting on the right side, there is a valve separating the right atrium and the right ventricle. That is right here. It's not shown super well, but trust me, it's here. And this valve is called the tricuspid valve. Why is it called the tricuspid valve? Tri means 3, so it has 3 cusps that make up the valve. Not that hard. On the left side of the heart, we have the left atrium, the left ventricle, and a valve here that separates the 2 chambers. This valve is called the mitral valve. You might hear it referred to as a bicuspid valve as well, because it has 2 cuffs that make up the valve. But in, a lot of medicine, the common name that you'll hear is mitral valve. We also have valves that separate our ventricles from the major vessels that they release blood into. So from the right ventricle, for example, to get from the right ventricle into the pulmonary artery, we have a valve here, which you can actually see. It's also a tricuspid valve, in that it has 3 cusps, and this is called the pulmonic valve. Finally, we have a valve here that separates the left ventricle from this large aorta. And this, not surprisingly, is called the aortic valve. And once again, it has 3 different cuffs to it. So the main takeaway point when it comes to valves is that separating each chamber and the chambers from the great vessels, we have a valve. The only bicuspid valve is the mitral valve, which is on the left side of the heart. All the other valves, the aortic, the pulmonic, and the tricuspid valve, all have 3 cusps. Now, you can have disease processes and things go wrong with any one of these valves where they get leaky and they don't come together nicely and form a barrier, or they get stenotic where there's calcium buildup and they kind of get thickened and makes it harder for blood to get from one chamber to the next. We'll talk about those types of disease states in future videos, but I want you to recognize that the valves can be damaged too, just like the actual chambers. And finally, the last section of this video, I want to talk about the coronary arteries. So as I mentioned before, the first place that blood goes once it leaves the heart is it actually goes right back to the heart, because the heart needs its own blood supply to feed its cells and do what it has to do. As you can see here, if I were to take off the top part of the heart, you can see this little red vessel. This is your first part of the coronary artery, and there's basically 2 directions that coronary arteries go. You can have a coronary artery that goes toward the left, and then one that goes toward the right. Starting with the one that goes toward the right, you can see this red vessel here on top of the heart. Not surprisingly, this is called your right coronary artery. The right coronary artery tends to supply a lot of blood flow to the right-sided chambers, namely the right ventricle, and it can also supply blood flow to the parts of your heart that are responsible for conduction and making sure you have a normal, regular heartbeat. So oftentimes, if you have a blockage on your right side in your right coronary artery, this could cause some types of arrhythmias that we'll talk about later. The right coronary artery is oftentimes abbreviated RCA. On the other side, we have our left main coronary artery, which is this little part here before it splits. And the left main coronary artery splits into 2 different major vessels. One of the most well-known coronary arteries is this one here that comes all the way down. This is called the left anterior descending, abbreviated LAD, and this vessel supplies blood, to a lot of chambers on the left side, but particularly the left ventricle. And I just told you guys a little bit ago that cardiology is kind of enamored and we really care about the left ventricle. So if you have a heart attack or blockages in this vessel, oftentimes this can lead to heart failure and a lot of other critical illnesses and issues. Way back in the day, this vessel, the LAD, used to be called the widowmaker. And that's kind of a scary term, but I think it was called that because, if you had a blockage here, your risk of death and hospitalization was very high as compared to blockages in some of these other vessels. The last vessel I want you to remember is this other branch that comes off of the left main coronary artery toward the side. And you can see it continues to come down this way. This vessel here is called the left circumflex artery, and you might see that abbreviated LCX. The left circumflex, as you can see, tends to supply blood flow, to the left atrium and also the backside of the left ventricle. And sometimes it is actually the vessel that's responsible for supplying the cells associated with your conduction system. A fun fact is that there are left dominant and right dominant people. If you're right dominant, that means your conduction system is supplied from the right coronary artery. If you're left dominant, it means your blood supply to your conduction system arises from your left circumflex. The vast majority of people, I think over 80%, are right dominant. But that leaves a small subset of the population as left dominant, and this is totally genetically based, and it's something we find out whenever people go for heart catheterizations. So remember, take-home points, the three main vessels are the RCA, the LAD, and the left circumflex. One of the most important vessels when it comes to heart function and survival is the LAD, again, because it supplies blood to that very, very important left ventricle. The final thing to keep in mind is that the heart also has veins on it. These blue veins here, and they take all that deoxygenated blood from the heart and they return it to the same place all deoxygenated blood goes. Let me just move it up here a little bit. You can see that this, called the coronary sinus, dumps deoxygenated blood into the right atrium, which is the same place that the superior and inferior vena cavas also bring deoxygenated blood. All right, everyone, really quick and simple video. Like I said, 3 key take-home points to remember as you move forward so that your anatomy pros and you can impress your friends. Number 1, remember that there are 4 chambers. The chambers on the top are atria, the chambers on the bottom are ventricles. The right side of the heart deals with deoxygenated blood, and the left side of the heart deals with oxygenated blood. Secondly, remember that there are 4 valves. Again, on the right side, you have the tricuspid valve. On the left side is the mitral valve or the bicuspid valve. Connecting the right ventricle to the pulmonary artery is the pulmonic valve, and the left ventricle to the aorta is the aortic valve. Just remember that disease and issues can happen with your valves. And so oftentimes, cardiologists and doctors, they will do imaging and they'll look at not only the chambers, but the function of the valves as well. And then finally, remember that the heart has to provide blood to itself, and it does this through coronary arteries. The big 3 are the right coronary artery, or the RCA, the left anterior descending, or the LAD, and the left circumflex, or the LCX. The one that gets a lot of the limelight and is the most important to remember is the LAD, because that supplies blood flow to your very important left ventricle. And if you have blockages or a heart attack there, that could predispose you to heart failure. With that, that's all I had planned for you today. So I really hope you enjoyed the video and learned something new. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to leave a comment on the video. Make sure to like and subscribe to my channel as well for more really simple content like this. So thank you again for watching and have a great rest of your day. Bye-bye.